Okay, welcome again to the Razorwire latest masterclass on information security. As per usual, we are going to do two parts to this particular session. Part one is about overcoming professional challenges. So really this kind of piece is about some of the things that you need to expect, some of the things that you may feel throughout your career. Some of these are not just for InfoSec in general. Many people do feel, a bit odd throughout their career. Maybe they suffer from burnout, imposter syndrome, whatever. We'll kind of discuss that for part one. Now, part two, I'm kind of doing a bit of a return to kind of defense in depth strategies. Defense in depth is such an important part of information security in general that you kind of really need to cover it over a couple of sessions. Now, hopefully I won't go over too much that I went over last time. And we're going to be looking at some of the more different types of defense in depth strategies that you can kind of go for and deal with, some of which are actually becoming really, really important in the, today's world, because as you may or may not have noticed, if you've been keeping up with things, a lot of legislation is changing around the world. And we'll kind of go into maybe a little bit of that as for part two. So, overcoming professional challenges. What a subject matter. I have been in information security for 25 years. And I come from a time where information security was viewed very differently to where it is today. So some of the things that I may have experienced in the early part of my career, I don't think you guys are going to experience as much of. That doesn't mean you're not going to experience it. It just means that you're possibly going to be a little bit luckier than maybe I was when I first got into it. Information security 25 years ago was very much a part of IT. It was called IT security back then. It really didn't focus that much on the people side of things. I mean, you hear a lot of information security professionals or writings or whatever talk about people, process, technology. That's kind of the InfoSec of today. But way back then, it was predominantly just the technology, a little bit of the procedures, and even less of the people. Back then, we experienced a number of different things because the information security sector was quite new back then. There was a lot of mystique around it. There was a lot of it tended to fall down to the people who didn't really find any other niche within the information security field. I was pretty good at networking back in the day. I was pretty good at software management, server management, that kind of thing. And I went through, the first stage of my career in front line, and then a very short period in second line before I really quickly moved into security. And that's really kind of where I found my niche. One of the things that I experienced back then, which you're going to probably experience here, in fact, you will experience here in today's world, was the speed that technology changes and the speed that the business world changes, and some of the new solutions that are being made available. They used to change reasonably slowly, but when the change occurred, it would start to speed up. Nowadays, it's a very different world. Boom, all of a sudden, one day, everyone's using AI. AI gets developed, and then everybody's building it into their product. Maybe a new zero-day vulnerability gets discovered, and boom, it's all over the media. There are people attacking it almost pretty much straight away. It's a fast-paced world. And we're constantly at battle with our counterparts, those malicious actors that you hear so often about. I refrain from calling them hackers because the original word hacker and the original meaning of the word hacker was very different back in the day. It was basically somebody who could manipulate technology and software in a way that it was not meant to be used, but it wasn't commonly damaging. It was just clever ways to use technology that it hadn't really been intended to do. later on down the line, that's where that word became synonymous with the more malicious actors out there. And today you see it all over the media. It's a marketing buzzword for if you're trying to sell a vendor product. You'll see hackers this, hackers that, hackers whatever. I consider myself to be, in all honesty, a hacker myself. I did back in the day utilize technology to do things that you shouldn't normally be able to do. It was a curiosity. It was something that I developed very early on in my career. How can I utilize this technology? Well, how can I attack this technology? How can I make it do something it shouldn't be able to do? And from that, I would learn how to secure that technology, how to utilize that technology in interesting ways to help protect the organization from being attacked. And back then it was predominantly viruses. Fast forward to today, and now the technological world has changed. Everything seems to be as a service. Your information security landscapes have changed along with that change in technology. For instance, back when I first got in, everything was a single piece of tin. An Exchange server was a piece of tin in a computer room or a data center. A server was a single piece of tin in a, as we called it, kind of in a rack in a data center in a computer room. Nowadays, you don't tend to have that. Everything's all kind of online up in the cloud. And I remember that change to the cloud, and that was really where significant amounts of advances in technology really started to lead us to the world we are here today and in at the moment. Prior to that, it was predominantly email. Email used to be just to send messages. Now you can send files, large files, you can do all kinds of things. And all of this is kind of done through the cloud. Now, one of the significant changes to my career was when I started to identify threat vectors for malicious actors. And when we started to go to the cloud, that set of threat vectors really kind of changed substantially very quickly, because everything beforehand had been predominantly internally within a network. Now, of course, or at the time, it was all changing to be out in a cloud somewhere, managed by somebody else who'd have other third parties who would help manage aspects of their infrastructure. So the skill set that I had to learn was almost alien in many respects to how I'd originally learned. And it made me realize that, moving through your career, you're going to have to evolve as that technology evolves, as people evolve, as businesses evolve. Most recently, we had a situation where there was a lot of people who were locked down. They were unable to go into their offices due to a particular virus that had been running rampant around the world. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of that particular virus because of where this is going to be ultimately uploaded, and I don't like that kind of thing, but you probably know what I'm talking about. And if you're watching this much further down the line, check out sort of like the 2021, 22, what they sometimes term as the beer bug, because it's actually a brand of beer. Those were also kind of significant in the way that the information security was applied, due to the fact that one minute everybody was in the office and the next minute they really weren't in the office. Everybody was working from home. And, the malicious actors, as they usually do, adapted very quickly to what was going on and started targeting their attacks accordingly. So quite often in your career, you're going to have to think like that attacker. Now, that is brilliant to do. It's great skill to have to put yourself into the position of someone else. But sometimes it can cause a little bit of friction with the people that you're working with who aren't in information security. People as a general rule, they like to think of things in a positive light. Yeah, you get your pessimists, you get, people who declare themselves as realists. I like to think I'm a realist. But back in the day, and sometimes it still happens now when you're looking at situations and how you could feasibly affect them, as if you were a malicious actor or something. People can view that as a very negative thing. I'll stop being negative about the product. Stop being negative about the project. Stop being this, that, and the other about, because you're just giving us problems. Okay. And it can have a bit of a hit on yourself as well, because over time, people start saying, look, I don't want to interact with information security professionals because they just come with the negative connotations. They're always telling us problems and they're never giving us those options. And this is kind of really where I learned to overcome that particular challenge of being viewed at negatively by when I come to the situation where I have something that's negative or could be construed as a blocker or whatever, I'll come also with a set of options on how to meet that particular challenge, how to resolve it, how to, reduce the risks or whatever in the most cost-effective way possible. Because let's face it, security, even today, is still critically underfunded, more than it should be. That is, by the way, changing. And because you're quite often dealing with multiple projects, we're still very much underutilized within organizations. Quite often people don't want to get involved in InfoSec, or they don't think they need to get involved with InfoSec until the end of a project. So you're going to face a lot of pressure to get things done in a very short space of time. That is good because it allows you to develop the ability to adapt very, very quickly. But equally, it means you are going to experience quite a significant level of stress doing that, even when you get used to it. When the project needs to go live in 2 weeks' time, your penetration test that you've organized is finishing in 3 or 4 days' time. It leaves very little time to resolve any issues before the go live date for anything that you may find. This is why in DevSecOps, you see a lot of people saying, engage security very early on in the project. And I'm a big believer in engaging with security at a very early stage of the project. But in order to get people within your organization to do that, if you are part of an organization where you're the InfoSec person, you have to have kind of done a bit of hearts and minds and made people realize that you're not the negative person that they think you are. You're actually quite a reasonable and fun person. It's just, it is just what it is. This is the kind of business that you're into. And by the fact that you come back with ways to mitigate those options, job is good and everybody's happy. One of the things also you might experience in your career, and everybody goes through this, I think, in one form or another, is imposter syndrome. Because change is so great, because the attack landscape is massive, and there's million things in any organization that need to be, you need to be concerned of from a security perspective, be it people, process, or technology. You are going to kind of at some point go, am I qualified to do all of this? Do I really know what I'm talking about? Especially when you maybe watch videos of YouTubers or maybe things on LinkedIn, listen to other people talking, other InfoSec people talking about feasibly concepts that you hadn't thought of before. And it does make you sit there and think, am I actually any good at what I do? Trust me, you are, because if you've reached, 5-10 years in the game, you're an experienced individual in the field of InfoSec. And even if you're more than 10 years, you're one of the most advanced people in InfoSec who are probably in the market today. You can't know everything. That's the one thing I will say. I've done pen testing in the past. I wasn't the greatest at pen testing. I have other people now in Razorthorn who do the pen testing, but I do understand the language they use, the concepts that they talk about, and some of the attack patterns and how dangerous they are. It was valuable for me to learn what I learned so I could interpret what the results were going to be. This is kind of why one of the other tips you hear me say quite a bit in the primer and in many of these kind of part ones of any masterclass is the concept of getting as broad a base skill knowledge as possible amongst the broadest possible skill set you feasibly can. If you do that, then you'll be able to interpret a lot of those results quickly, cleanly, and efficiently. So just bear that in mind. And when that imposter syndrome kicks in, kick it to the curb. Go and sit down, take a breath, have a beer, have a coffee, go and watch a YouTube video, go and listen to a podcast for 20 minutes, and just kind of bring yourself back into the zone. You can't, you can't do everything. One of the other things you may see InfoSec professionals go through, and you may even experience yourself, is something that's quite common with doctors, which is called God syndrome, where you view yourself as the most important person in the room because you know everything there is to know about InfoSec and so on and so forth. Trust me on this one. Nobody is going to thank you if you go into any meeting room with a God complex, okay? Kick that one to the curb as well. It's just as dangerous as the imposter syndrome, and kick that one straight to the curb. You are not going to be the most intelligent person in the room more often than not. Everybody has their own disciplines and everybody is good at something. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in that room. Okay, every now and then you come across somebody who probably isn't very good at their career, but it's not for you to decide. It's normally their manager. All you're there to do is to look at a situation and advise. And that's why I very much stick quite commonly to the advisory role whenever I engage with any customers, or whether I'm, being employed directly as a CISO or whatever. I'm there to advise. I'm not there necessarily to make decisions. I'm there to advise on security matters. Quite commonly, it'll be the C-suite that will make the high-end decisions. Watch out for middle management, by the way. They like to make decisions thinking they know what the bosses at the top want. Always get validation from the C-suite if you can, because middle management, they don't always get it right. And in fact, quite rarely do they get it right. They're just there to kind of keep an organization moving forward and to help manage larger groups of people. They're not there to make company-wide decisions. And that's the other thing. Sometimes you'll experience a situation where somebody will tell you, oh no, you can't talk to that individual at the top. You can't talk to that person. You can't send that person an email. They're far too important to be bothered by this. If it's an issue, then, and it's a security threat to the organization, then more often than not, somebody at the top, and trust me on this one, will want to bloody well know about it. So let them know about it. You're probably not going to get thanked by a middle manager, but hey, it's your responsibility to address threats to the organization. So this is the other thing you're going to have to develop within yourself, a thick skin. You're going to get potentially quite a bit of criticism over the years. You know what? Again, kick that to the curb. Don't worry about what people are saying. Worry about performing your role, performing it well, and providing good quality advisory that come with good quality options afterwards. The people who disparage you and cause you pain and tell you can't do things, let them get on with it. Do what you need to do to deliver the best results that you can. Be the best InfoSec professional you can. Kick imposter syndrome to the curb. God complexes to the curb. Just be very factual in what you're dealing with. Be honest as well. Honesty is always the best policy with information security, because the moment you get caught out in some kind of lie or where you bent the truth a little bit, and you will probably get caught out at some point, it's going to reduce your credibility exponentially. So by staying honest, and with, you may get things wrong from time to time. We all do. We're not perfect. We're human beings. But admit to it and say, absolutely, yeah, you know what? I looked at that situation a little bit wrong. Let me sit down and have another look and rethink it. Don't be too frightened to sit down and accept, yeah, I've made the wrong decision there. Let's do something to fix it. It's better to fix a situation than still run with something that's wrong. It's tough being in InfoSec, but it's very rewarding, especially when incidents kick off and you resolve those incidents quickly, cleanly, and efficiently. And for brief periods of time in your career, you'll be like gold dust to the C-suite. You'll be that person that saved the day. You'll be like Superman or Superwoman. And it's fantastic when you feel that. More often than not, business just carries on going. You may get a bit of a pat on the back and a thanks, but more often than not, it's on to the next thing. So don't take it too personally when you do. Being an InfoSec is something that career-wise can be so challenging that you may experience burnout. When you're dealing in a whole host of InfoSec items, you've got your defense in depth items you're dealing with, you've got your personnel items that you're dealing with, you've got hearts and minds to kind of try and keep people interested in InfoSec, you've got awareness campaigns that people get easily a bit tired of, and so on and so forth. You just kind of need to be a little bit careful about what you're, what you're feeling at that time. Just carry on going and just be the best at what you can be. And that's probably the best piece of advice. Don't worry about it. Get on with it. And overall, don't panic. If you like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it's written on that big red book at the front. I love that. My daughter tells me that all the time, and she's 4. If you're not panicking, then potentially other people around you aren't panicking. And then the last thing, really, if you're experiencing these kinds of challenges in the way that you're dealing with people, then there's going to be a number of other people who are going to be experiencing similar kinds of challenges. If you see other InfoSec professionals falling over a little bit, having a little stumble in their day-to-day work, pick them back up, help lift them up, lift the people up around you. Because when things get tough and things get hard, these people will rally around you and they will protect you as much as you protected them when things were getting hard. And it means when you're dealing with an incident, you have a trustworthy group of individuals around you who can help you deal with that incident quickly, cleanly, and efficiently. It is what it is. Build people up around you and just be a decent person. Right. Part 2, defense in depth. Right, defense in depth, just as a quick refresher. Defense in depth is whereby you layer security countermeasures in a way that provides an in-depth level of defense. So by layering your defenses, be it a policy, a procedure, a piece of technology, a person reviewing something, monitoring, internal resources, external resources, penetration tests, assurance, the list is pretty much nearly endless these days on the types of defense depth items you can put in place. Some of them are firewalls, some of them are endpoint security solutions. We used to call it antivirus software, but it's obviously antivirus software has expanded now in its capability to provide a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. It's now file integrity monitoring and all kinds of stuff. And access controls as well. Multi-factor authentication has become the thing nowadays. It's a standard now. No longer is usernames and passwords secure. They weren't really secure back in the day anyway, I'll be totally and brutally honest. But it just took a little while for multi-factor authentication to become as standard. And the other thing to remember about your defense in depth is you are going to need to make sure that you review it regularly. Make it something that you're reviewing quarterly, biannually, feasibly even monthly. After any significant event or significant technological change or significant development, you need to sit down and look objectively at your defense in depth in its entirety. Now, some of your defense in depth will consist of things like policies and procedures. Now, policies and procedures, as we've said before, they're built there to tell you what you can do, what you can't do. Well, we'll tell the employees what they can do, can't do, as well as third parties. And And they may change very rarely, maybe once a year. Maybe you'll notice something in a policy that isn't quite right, or you're going towards some kind of compliance requirements like PCI DSS, and you need to do a bit of a change out of your annual process. Or maybe an incident has kicked off and you want to review and add something to your policies and procedures. That's all fine, but they rarely ever change. It's the technological side that has a tendency to change, and that has a real quick tendency to change as well. People are another thing that change very, very quickly. I tell you now, one of the hardest things you can do is to work for a decent sized organization who acquires another similarly sized decent organization. Because let's assume both organizations have an information security officer. First and foremost, you've then got 2 information security officers, which most people would think would be a fantastic thing, but it depends on whether or not you have very similar view sets. It's not always the case. And sometimes people will be a little bit worried about their job as well, just saying. The more important aspect of the security behind an environment with defense in depth is you've then got 2 entire environments with 2 very different defense in depth models, potentially, that you're managing. And not only that, business people have a tendency to have this wonderful view that the moment that you merge with another organization, that organization just comes in and starts utilizing the same technology that you're using and operating the same way that you're operating. It doesn't happen that way. I can tell you now, it doesn't happen that way. Some of the projects that come out of a merger or an acquisition can go on for months, sometimes even years. It depends on the size of the organization and the size of the merger. You don't just bin all that technology on day one and everybody immediately moves over to the technology that you're dealing with. So sometimes you'll even have, as I said, 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 defense in depth strategies that you're handling all at the same time. And you don't necessarily know the environments that you're taking on board as they're being acquired. I have worked with some organizations that deal in like 1 acquisition every quarter, and they did that for like 2 years. It's probably the most difficult scenario you could feasibly be in. I mean, you know, the amount of organizations they acquired, some were very, very small, and there wasn't too much of a pain to merge those defense in depth strategies, or at least to kind of bring them on board. Others, there was much, much larger organizations, and things tend to happen very slowly the larger the organization is. And that's one of the challenges of your defense in depth strategies. You know, if you're in a large lumbering organization that doesn't change quickly or is resistant to adapting to change, then you can't kind of find your defense in depth strategy disappearing and becoming, you know, very quickly unworkable, because, you know, times have changed, as they must inevitably, and it makes things really, really difficult. So it's quite wise sometimes when you're doing defense in depth to consider like an overarching level of defense in depth, simple defense in depth you can put in place to kind of provide additional layers of security above and beyond what you would normally be doing. Training and awareness is a good part of that, good example. Yes, training is part of your defense in depth strategy normally, but when you've got other organizations that you're dealing with who've had maybe different levels of security, you need to kind of bring them in line with yours. So, you know, building universally accepted kind of security and awareness campaigns can be very, very, very useful. Making your policies and your procedures simple and easy to read and understand, a very good tactic, which will pretty much work in any organization. And it won't require too much of a change. You just need to get whoever's coming on board in that merger and acquisition to read through that policy all those sets of procedures and just kind of sign off that they've accepted and understood and will comply with it. But the technological aspect is commonly the most difficult. And what's becoming even more difficult now is that third-party involvement. As I mentioned before, everything is becoming as a service, absolutely everything. And with that comes that reliance on third parties doing the security they need to do. Go back 10 years and yeah, you have third-party assessments. They weren't always done particularly well. There weren't as many third parties we had to deal with. Quite commonly, when you bought a solution, you would just install it on your local server. It was usually some kind of client, so you had the server side, you had the client side, and it was all inside your perimeter, so to speak. Nowadays, perimeters are pretty much dead. Everything is all over the place. You'll have data over there in one, CRM solution, and you'll have a HR solution over there with a whole other data set involved in that. And then you'll have your general kind of storage areas for your general data, your templates, your reporting, depending upon the type of organization and what it is. That could be hosted elsewhere as well. It used to be one aspect of defense in depth for third-party support, but or third-party reviews. But now it's becoming a much bigger part of the stack, where it's not just enough anymore to pull out a questionnaire and send it over to somebody. You need to have proper assurance. We're seeing a lot of organizations now requiring the right to audit in their contracts with third parties, so they can do a much more in-depth view of the security of that third party. The more critical the third party, the deeper that you tend to go into their own InfoSec. And that's before you even get to the questions of liability. Some organizations, for instance, that I've dealt with in the past, refuse to be compliant with specific legislations because they don't want the liability if it all goes horribly wrong. They push it back onto the customer. Now, that's quite a difficult situation to be in, because the requirements are pushed back onto you as their customer, but you have no ability to make any change to them on the other side of it, because they're their own organization with their own wants, their own needs. So this is where sometimes it's a good idea to get a bit of technical assistance with this. Ongoing assurance is becoming a really big part of the defense in-depth stack. You'll hear it termed as continuous pen testing. You'll hear it termed in a variety of different ways, but ongoing security checks on a much more regular basis than the one snapshot in time is rapidly becoming a thing that organizations feel that they really need to do. And I think we're going to see a significant change in frameworks and legislation down that route as well. Basically, third-party assessment tools and expanded tooling is also something that's becoming quite common today. So double-checking people's certifications for ISO 27001, PCI DSS, HIPAA, whatever it may well be. Double-checking the contracts to make sure that the security is in line with what your expectations are and the minimum standard that you'll accept. And please make sure you try to get in with the legal teams. Part of your defense in depth is now building those relationships with people like the legal teams, the financial teams, the project management teams, to let them let you know when somebody is being engaged or a new as a service solution is being engaged, so that you can identify it earlier on. And you can look at the contracts and make sure that contractually they're obliged to meet minimum security requirements as well. And never really used to be done before PCI forced it. One of the other things that you've probably heard me talking about before is wargaming. It's becoming a thing now whereby when you do disaster recovery tests, instant response tests, that kind of thing, sometimes you'll get critical third parties involved in that particular project or that particular scenario, to test them out with their own instant response as much as testing yours. What would they do? How do they operate their instant response? I think we're going to see that starting to occur a lot more going forward. And again, should be something that you consider in your defense in depth. As I said before, defense in depth is not just about technology. It's also about underpinning procedures and methods of checking, especially in your supply chain. When you're doing your defense in depth and you're looking at things like incident response, and we kind of covered it in the incident response side of things, but you're going to need to kind of involve people outside of the InfoSec departments. You're going to need to start looking at getting involved, as I said, kind of before, the legal areas, the financial areas, project management areas. Also look at, what your company does and cherry pick very high-end departments. So you're not going to really want to deal too much with the janitorial department or the people who keep the buildings lights on and so forth. Well, you may want to. It depends on the environment. If you're working for the military, for instance, then yes, you do. You need to do it at all different levels. But for commercial organizations, most of them don't really care too much about that. But if you're working for a media company, the journalists, you'll need to involve them to a certain extent in some of the decision making and give them a view of what you're doing with your defense in depth, school them in it. Again, hearts and minds, because what that will do is that will mean people will know who your department are. They know when there's an incident, they just need to report it in. And it brings that level of defense in depth up, to a degree that you would never have feasibly had sort of 5-10 years ago. Awareness really is everything. Even if they report something and it turns out to be nothing at all, don't vilify them for it. The process is working. You're getting the response that you need. So just bear that in mind. It's important. Defense in depth is so much more than just the technology and just the procedures. And build it into as many different areas within your stack, depending on how you depict it. I depict it as an iceberg these days. Some people still use an onion. However you're going to term it. Right, let's get on to some of the questions, shall we? I can see there's a few down here. Do you think that the NCSC and the UK military drive towards secure by design principles is trying to force the introduction of security as early as possible into a project? I think it is, and I think it's important. And I think it's important to look at the military way of undertaking security as a very, very, very valid way of modeling your own security. The military have been having to secure their environment on a lot of different levels for many, many, many years. The malicious actors they deal with are not really that different from the ones that you're going to be dealing with, other than they're dealing with people who want to come and do harm to either the nation state or them or the populace or whatever. You're not going to be dealing quite on that level, but you're still dealing with malicious actors that want to cause pain and problems and steal resources and, try and ransom you for money or whatever. And that can kill an organization really, really quickly. Trust me, a bad incident can really kill a company very, 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 very quickly, even the larger ones, although they're slightly better at weathering it. But no, the military method of, secure by design is fantastic. If you design it securely and you don't let that security get too overbearing, then you'll have, a good layer of coverage. Nothing's ever 100%, but you'll at least have a really good layer of coverage. And most of the rest of security events that could happen can be covered through wargaming playbooks. So at least, even if it does happen, you have a very quick, easy, practiced method of response. You know what I mean? It's probably more important in many respects than spending vast quantities of cash on cool tools. If you've got good, well-practiced incident response procedures, your defense in depth, again, rises exponentially. Not in the fact that you're preventing something from happening, but you're able to recover very, very quickly and deal with the situation very, very quickly. That's a whole area of incident response. We've already covered that, so go and have a look at that particular masterclass for a refresher on it. And if you want me to kind of go over it again, I can do that. There's a lot to incident response and a good incident response plan, but in essence, I think it's the best way to drive your organization, secure by design. And by the way, obviously, maybe a good tactic is when you join an organization, get to know the key people there. I bet you at least one of them has probably served in the military. And if they have served in the military, they will understand security and they can be your greatest ally. They'll understand why you're there and what you're looking to achieve, because that's what they've lived and breathed for however long they were in the military. Just bear that in mind. Okay. When I suffer from imposter syndrome or I'm struggling to follow the extreme technical conversation, the best advice I've ever gotten was to engage positively with a response like, yes, interesting. Can you send me some more details and I'll look further into it? Basically, buy yourself time so you don't assume you have the answer. That's a good piece of advice, and that's something I recommend to a lot of people I mentor. Okay, how do we unpack this? Even when you're faced with a situation that you've experienced before, sometimes it's a good thing to say, okay, not a problem. Send me over the details, or maybe reiterate the details if they've given it to you verbally and you've noted them down. Documentation is the key in InfoSec for many reasons. And assuming they say yes, or they give you that email, you've then got a bit of time to think objectively around the situation that you've been presented with. If you get presented with a situation and you have genuinely no idea what you're going to do, it's a great diversionary tactic, as I call it, to just turn around and say, yeah, okay, no problems. Let me have a think about the situation and I'll get back to you shortly. People are used to being posed with strategic or difficult problems, and nobody expects you as an individual to know the exact answer to the exact problem right there, right then, off the bat. And if they do, I just wouldn't deal with them in the future. They're obviously either very sure of themselves, which is one thing, or a bit of a pain in the butt, which is another one. You know, even when you're walking into a situation you've experienced before, there are going to be nuances that are different. And really what you want to try to get into your brain is the ability to deal with a situation based off of the situation with its own merits. Yeah, draw upon your experience. That's great. But don't think, one ransomware attack is going to be exactly the same as another ransomware attack, or that one insider threat, somebody stealing intellectual property, is going to be exactly the same as another situation where somebody's stealing, intellectual property. No situation is ever, ever, ever exactly the same, unless you're experiencing the same thing with the same problem with the same people, in which case you seriously need to work on your risk management and whoever owns that risk, because obviously you're experiencing a lot of the same risks and issues occurring. So yeah, buy yourself some time. Imposter syndrome is, as I said before, it's something everybody experiences at some point. Sometimes maybe you're feeling a little bit down and you're like, oh, am I genuinely good at what I do? Because maybe you didn't get a job, or maybe you didn't get, the kudos that you were expecting to get for facilitating something for somebody. Just kick that stuff to the curb, man. Find your own way of dealing with it. And if you've learned NLP and you've learned a bit about psychology, some of my basic soft skills that I recommend everybody learns, you'll learn techniques to deal with that kind of thing, as well as God complexes. You'll be able to spot it very early on as well and deal with it in yourself. No one will thank you for it. And with imposter syndrome, you won't thank yourself for it either. It's just not worth your time. Have I ever experienced imposter syndrome? Oh God, yes, absolutely. In the early days of my career, very much so. In midway through my career, yeah, I did, and even later on in my career, I did. But I just learned how to deal with it. I learned how to get rid of that feeling very, very quickly. But again, as I said, alluded to sort of at the beginning of this conversation, I'm an old man in this game now. I've been doing it for 25 years. And I can spot people who are trying to fluff me with long words and complicated ideas that aren't really that complicated. And they're just using long words to kind of make themselves, I don't know, either feel better than or you know, more qualified than they actually are. I don't deal with any of that stuff anymore. You know, one of the key things that you tend to learn in this is, you know, especially in InfoSec, is to be concise, to be honest, some cases blunt, but politically correct and blunt. And don't fluff things. I mean, we've got so many acronyms in this space at the moment. I sometimes wonder what half of them are, you know. And as I said, I've been in this for 25 years. So just because somebody is trying to explain something really, what seems really complicated with large, flowery descriptions and extensive wordings, just kind of nod and then read up on whatever it is they were talking about. I guarantee you'll find it far, far, far simpler than you probably thought it was, or at least what they were making it out to be. Don't let other people make you feel bad. But yeah, I've experienced it. Most recent one is being a businessman, you know, and it's not even in InfoSec. I've been running Razorwire now for over 16 years. And it's my first ever business. I've never run any other businesses before that. So yeah, you know, in the early days, it was very hard. I used to experience it all the time. In InfoSec, I experienced it in the early days of my career all the time. But once you get your techniques and you figure out what kind of calls you off and lets you think a little bit more realistically about things, then you know that drops off. Isn't there a flaw in the defense in depth model, as often multiple technologies are added to address the same risks, whereas other risks are unknown or ignored and thus remain vulnerable? It's not so much a flaw. You're using your resources, of very scant resources that you have to address the same thing all the time. I mean, I'm not a big believer, for example, in utilizing one brand, one vendor, one organization for my defense in depth. I don't believe in it. Certain large-scale vendors who create operating systems will try to tell you that their endpoint security product that comes with, you know, the operating system is the greatest thing in the world. It isn't, you know. I'm sorry, but it's not. I'm not going to say the name of the company, but if it was, then we wouldn't have half the problems that we do. Is it a layer that you can have? Well, it's a free layer. It's there, I suppose, but I wouldn't count on it. What you want to do is to look at the best products, if you're looking at products in your space, and layer them appropriately. Have a good endpoint security product. Have a good IDS IPS product. Now, IDS IPS is not the same as an endpoint security product, but there's a lot of synergy. You know, IDS IPS is looking for traffic and packets that it thinks are dodgy. Maybe it's malicious code, maybe it's, you know, malicious actions, whatever it may well be. Endpoint security is protecting the endpoints from code being injected into them or things being run on them and installed on them, that kind of thing. Are they the same technology? No, they are not. I suppose arguably they're security technologies, but they're not, they don't exist on the same level. One's looking at network traffic, one's looking at the endpoint. I could go into the OSI layers, but I'm not going to, because it really bores me when I do that. Policies and procedures, you know, they're not there technologically speaking to handle an issue. They're there to prevent the issue from occurring at all. If it's a user-led issue or a third-party led issue who's signed off on your policies. It's also there to clearly define and give you a recourse if somebody does do something wrong. Is it the same as your endpoint and your IDS IPS? No, it's not. Is it the same as your security awareness training? No, it is not. Now, if you were to go out and buy 4 different security awareness trainings, you're probably not efficiently spending your budget. You know, you want to go out and look for the one product that works for you for a training. Then you want to run an awareness campaign. And you don't rely on just training alone for your awareness campaign. Hearts and minds, there's multiple ways of doing it. You know, if you've got 4 different endpoint security products, then there's a serious problem somewhere in your brain. And you want to deal with that really, really quickly, because you only really need one endpoint security product. Do you use that endpoint security product for a VPN? Can do, but I probably wouldn't want to. I'd get like a VPN product, you know. Firewall technologies do come with things like IDS, IPS, and you know, you can have some elements of your defense in depth with the same vendor. You know, again, I'm trying to stay away from vendors, but there are quite a few of the vendors that provide you with firewalls or can provide you with IDS, IPS. And they work really nicely together because they talk really well. That's not a problem. But you don't probably want to buy their endpoint security item. You probably don't want to utilize their email security item. You want to go to another vendor for that. Once you've layered that defense, then you know, you're going to have a much broader ability to protect the environment. And as I said before, there's synergy, but there is crossover, and crossover isn't a bad thing as long as you're not buying the same damn product over and over again. Obviously, that's different. I used the example earlier on of a merger and acquisition. Yeah, sometimes you're going to have 2 defense in depth models, but you should really kind of migrate and, you know, bring it in line with one kind of model as quickly and efficiently as you can, because things get difficult to manage and maintain with all the different dashboards and all the different environments and so on and so forth. And depending upon the type of security you're implementing in your strategy, depends on what your defense in depth is going to look like. You know, defense in depth years ago didn't really include encryption as a general rule. Then BitLocker came along, and you could encrypt your data, but it wasn't, you know, it was all tied in with your user account. So if somebody got your user account details, they could still get in. It doesn't matter. You know, if they got your device, yeah, they could read it. They can go and have a look at the data that you got on it. But if they cracked your username, password, and boom, they're straight in. Don't tie your defense in depth in with one another. Have it crossing over, have it having good synergy, but don't buy everything from one particular vendor. It never goes particularly well. And no vendor is good at everything. You know, depends on whether you look at certain magic quadrants. You know, you got to remember, magic quadrants created by marketing companies are normally populated with the companies that paid them the most. I'll be honest. Maybe some of my other guests who are formerly from the said marketing companies may disagree, but you know, maybe that's just my opinion. So thank you all for attending this masterclass, and see you later.